this second episode of Red Pens and Red Flags, I talked to a longtime high school special education teacher, Veronica Spedner. Veronica offers a heartfelt and clear-eyed look at what's at stake in our high school classrooms. With humor, resolve, and raw honesty, she reminds us why we fight for equity and what we stand to lose if we fail to do so. Veronica defended the legal and moral necessity of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, and warned of regression if protections are removed. If kids do not learn empathy and tolerance for each other's differences in school, then how are they going to act as adults in the workforce? Something to think about, right? Enjoy the discussion. Welcome to Red Pens and Red Flags, the podcast that's not afraid to grade the current state of American education. My name is Rictor Riolo, a grad student knee-deep in the world of teaching, technology, and just trying to stay out of lunch duty. Today, I am joined by Veronica Spedner, a special education instructor. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Can you describe your current role in education?
I'm a high school special education teacher at a high school with a very diverse population and a large number of students with IEPs.
How have your personal values as an educator influenced your work?
So my main goal is to prepare my students for what comes after school, to prepare them for their futures, for the working world, college, whatever life brings them. I believe in hard work. I believe in doing the best that you can in anything that you endeavor, and that definitely follows suit with what I do here as a teacher.
Has this political climate changed the way you feel about being a teacher?
Absolutely. The current political climate it doesn't feel education friendly. And it makes me feel like I need to protect my students more than I used to have to in a lot of ways, not just in education policy, but also in immigration policy, because as I said, I work in a very diverse population, and many of my students fear what is happening right now in politics.
Let's talk about state-level control. How has it historically impacted marginalized communities in education?
At the state level, there's been a lot of different policies over the years that have impacted our marginalized communities in the way of, how it affects our students with racism, how it affects them with inclusion, all sorts of factors. And it's challenging because state versus federal can definitely conflict with one another. That conflict between state and federal, that's challenging because, here in the state of Oregon, we're much more liberal-minded, right? By and large, though there's many conservative parts to Oregon, but the main population in the metro areas are very liberal. And then you throw in what's happening right now at the federal level that just completely conflicts with that. And it brings about a lot different levels of concern.
At the time of this recording, a federal judge from Massachusetts has blocked the Trump administration from shuttering the Department of Education. What are your concerns or thoughts regarding the attempted shuttering?
Well, I think having the Department of Education on our side is incredibly important. Not only does it affect our school funding, but the Department of Education is crucial in making sure that laws in the Individuals with Disabilities Act is adhered to, that education for students who are English language learners is adhered to, and not to mention the fact that the Department of Education is what allows our students to be able to pursue their post-secondary educational goals particularly when it comes to attending college. And so shuttering all of that and putting it all in the hands of the state is incredibly concerning because the states are not prepared for that. They're not built for that. We don't have policies. We don't have funding. And so we really need the Department of Education to help not control, but mandate that which we are required to follow as educators legally. Yeah, not everybody feels welcome in this educational environment, and that's really sad.
An Idaho teacher is resigning after being asked to take down posters in her classroom. Let me explain. Sarah Inama, a 6th grade history teacher at Lewis and Clark Middle School in Meridian, Idaho, is resigning after the school district asked her to remove posters from her classroom. The posters read, "Everybody is welcome here," and "In this room, everyone is welcome, important, accepted, respected, encouraged, valued, equal." The district cited a content-neutral policy intended to prevent the promotion or opposition of any political, ideological, or socially contentious issues. Inama, who says the posters had been up for probably 4 years, initially complied with the request. However, she later had a change of heart. She told KTVB, a local news station in Boise, "I went into my classroom and put it back up. Then I emailed my principal and said, I don't agree. I don't agree that this is a personal opinion. I feel like this is the basis of public education." The district held a meeting to clarify how the posters violated their policy. Their policy states, "School property shall not be used by personnel for the advancement of individual beliefs," which includes the display of banners or flags. Inama believes the issue stemmed from the visual content of her posters, noting that the designs included people of different skin colors, something she says not everyone agrees with. When questioned about the controversy at a meeting, the district did not clarify what, specifically, they considered to be a personal opinion in Inama's posters. They reiterated that the posters did not comply with district policy. On May 9th, following the controversy, Inama submitted her resignation, effective for the next school year. In her resignation letter, she wrote that the district was more interested in not alienating people with a racist view of our students, rather than supporting me and my classroom motivational posters. David Benetti, a trustee on the school board, commented on a podcast that he was disappointed Inama went to the media rather than working through the issue internally. "I really wish that a different choice had been made there," he said. Inama told Idaho Education News, "We would never let our students say hurtful and discriminatory things to each other, and I won't allow adults to either."
What changes do you foresee in how your school or district approaches equity for students with disabilities?
Right now, I feel that my school and my district does a good job of making sure that the resources we have here in our district are equitable, that our students with disabilities are included in the general education setting with as much access to different kinds of learning as possible. But I do worry that if things change, if funding changes, if policy changes, that we're going to just be right back into the 1960s where our students with disabilities are separated or isolated from the rest of the students that are receiving an education. And that is not okay. I grew up in the 70s and in the 80s, and we did not have the same level of inclusion that we have now. And I really would hate to see us go back to that, because when I see my students with disabilities in the general education setting now, they're happy, they're thriving, and other students are benefiting from having them there. They're learning tolerance, they're learning patience, they're learning how to work with different kinds of people that they're going to see in the work setting. And so it's incredibly important that we continue to include all students in our general education settings for the benefit of all students.
It's probably like the only positive thing from the No Child Left Behind thing by putting all the kids in.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. That and, our policies of inclusion have helped our students with disabilities because, a student with Down syndrome doesn't need to be at a special school. They can be learning with all the rest of the students, maybe in a different way. Maybe you modify things for them, you provide different accommodations for them, but there's no reason they can't be part of the education that every child gets.
I have a student who is on the path to getting an alternative certificate. So I know exactly who you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, and that student has probably benefited from being around their peers because, as I said, our job is to prepare them for the next step. And as they go into the working world, we're not going to be isolating them there. They need to be able to hold jobs. They need to be able to pursue careers. They need to be able to pay their bills just like everybody else. And when you isolate them throughout their K-12 education, they are not prepared to go out into the real world. And people in the real world are not prepared to have them in jobs. And that is a big problem.
Here we go. Project 2025. Ready?
Oh, God.
Are you familiar with Project 2025? If so, what are your initial reactions or concerns?
Well, I think we should be calling it Project 1965, not Project 2025, because really all it seems to do is push us back into a time in the past when we were desperately trying to move forward into more progressive thinking, more progressive policies. And Project 2025 feels like we're going the wrong direction. We're taking away diversity. We're taking away inclusion. We're taking away all the things that make our schools rich and diverse and beautiful right now, and going back to a time when it was very unapproachable for a lot of people.
Let's talk about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. What are your thoughts on DEI in the professional educational landscape and classrooms?
Well, let's remember that these policies were put in place because they didn't exist before. We didn't have diversity. We didn't have inclusion in our educational system, in our workplaces, and they were put there to require that these things happen so that employers, so that schools would recognize that we cannot exclude people just based on race, just based on gender identity, just based on disability. And I think that they are incredibly important policies to have in place, because if it requires a policy to force this to happen, then I think that's okay, because it should be happening. I'm not really sure how else to say that. You know, it's important that everybody be part of the system, because, again, looking past education and looking into the real world, when you walk into a company, there are diverse populations working in different companies. There are going to be people with disabilities working in these companies. And if we don't teach our youth how to be comfortable with that when they are younger, then it's only going to cause more problems down the road when they're in the working world. So if it means we have to create policies to make this happen, I think it's unfortunate that we need to do that, but I think it's a benefit for all students, because, again, that exposure does nothing but benefit people.
You previously mentioned that your current working environment at the school you're at is very positive of DEI practices, but do you see it changing next year?
Maybe not next year, but I do see change coming, and that is very scary. Being in an inner city high school, we have populations of all races, all gender identities, all types of disabilities in this school, and I worry that as policies change, and we start to, as I said before, go backwards in what schools look like, I worry that we are really doing a huge disservice to our students, and we're not preparing them appropriately for the future.
Do you consider yourself DEI?
Absolutely. I think equity is incredibly important, and we need to remember that equity and equality are not the same thing, and that gets very easily confused. So we need to really take a hard look at what those two words mean and make sure that we are providing everybody with the things they need in order to be successful in this world. And some people just require a little bit more or a little bit different things in order to find success, and that's okay.
If you could protect just one thing in special education right now, one thing, what would it be?
Inclusion, 100%. My students deserve the right to receive the same education as their peers without being removed from them and treated differently.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's currently the head of the Department of Health and Human Services, wants to create some kind of an autism registry. What are your thoughts on that, and what could it possibly lead to, even though the White House currently denies wanting to do this?
Well, it's going to lead to segregation of our students. And again, that takes us back to a time that we fought to move away from.
And we'll be right back.
Sorry.
National Institute of Health is collecting private medical records. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. says the data is vital for his new push to study autism. Additionally, Kennedy says he plans to launch a disease registry for autism that would track the condition like a disease outbreak. Kennedy has repeatedly suggested, without evidence, that environmental factors like vaccines contribute to autism rates.
Remember where you left off? Okay.
Creating an autism registry, again, creates a type of segregation for our students and adults in this world, right? Because it brings us back to a time that we fought to be free from, when people of color were segregated, people of different gender identities were segregated, and now you want to segregate our students with autism. We have a higher number of students with autism than we used to in the past. That is true, but there have been a lot of changes in the way we identify people with autism. We shouldn't be penalizing people for finally being able to identify their disability. We should be working on research and development of how to help people with autism, not separating them from the population, because if you segregate people with autism or anybody with a disability the way we used to in education, they would be attending separate schools where they don't get to integrate with other students and learn how to be part of a community, how to be part of the working world. That moves forward into their job life, into their adult life. And then they become segregated in those areas as well. And it just perpetuates on and on and on, and it's absolutely not okay.
And there's more opportunities out there other than just goodwill.
Absolutely. There are so many opportunities for people with autism out there. Having autism doesn't make a person dumb. It doesn't make a person incapable. Actually, people with autism have way more abilities than people realize. I did an IEP meeting the other day for a student with autism, and when I asked him, what do you feel your strengths are? One of the things that he told me is, I'm smarter than people give me credit for. And he's absolutely correct. Just because he struggles in school, just because his reading level is low, just because he doesn't write very well, does not mean that he does not have a high level of intelligence and lots of abilities that will allow him to productively contribute to society.
What gives you hope in this moment in our country?
What gives me hope is that even though right now there is a majority in government that feels differently than many of us do, it gives me hope that there are still a lot of people out there who believe in equity, in inclusion, in diversity, and they aren't going to stop fighting for these things. Nobody's ready to give up. And I have been on this earth long enough to know that things do come full circle, and I have hope that we will find our way back to a better place again.
If you could send a message to the Trump administration making decisions about the future of education, what would you want them to hear?
I want them to hear from our students. I want them to hear from the students who have benefited from these programs, who have benefited from these policies. I want them to actually spend time in a public school and understand that what we are doing here is not indoctrinating our students. We are not teaching them things like critical race theory. We are not doing half of the things that they think we are. We're doing a whole lot more. And what we're doing is lots and lots of things that will support our young people be able to become productive members of society in the very near future.
Freedom is one generation away from extinction. And look what's happening now.
Yeah. I just want to say that, as an American, I haven't felt the highest level of pride in these last several years. I'm 55 years old. I'm not new to this. My pride as an American is not very high right now. And I'm seeing freedoms that my parents' generation fought for being slowly taken back away by the current administration, and it's honestly soul-crushing. I worry for our kids because the students that I have now in high school, they have spent their whole school career being accepted, being included, and what's waiting for them on the other side of that right now if things continue to go in the direction that they are. That's my concern.
Well, thank you for joining me, Veronica.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time to hear from educators. This is a really important topic.
Thank you for listening to Red Pens and Red Flags. This podcast series samples multiple public education professionals from different roles in schools. This includes teachers, administrators, special education, paraprofessionals, and language specialists.